This one is instructional modifications for students are planned from carefully elicited evidence of student learning. So, modifying based on what students have. And you've already said that you have a lot of those assessments going on. So this one will be interesting to see where we end up on the scale. So the lower degree of implementation, this top level, educator does not elicit evidence of student learning relative to the learning goals of each activity. The little bit higher level 4, educator elicits only graded evidence of student learning relative to each specific learning goal after the activity. Level 3, educator elicits mostly graded evidence of student learning relative to each specific learning goal after each activity. So maybe what's the difference between the three of these when you hear those different levels?
Well, these two have the graded component in there. And I think one thing that really sticks out with me with all three of them is, now that we've gone to the standards-based or the skills-based, is something that I've become more aware of is when I send something home, our parents, because I know my kids can't always tell the parents this is the learning goal that it's hooked to. I think we need to, I don't know how we somehow do this, but I think we need to somehow get to, this is the I can statement, hooked to it. Because I think if we keep putting it in that I can statement language, that's going to be the most effective for parents to then take it further at home. So anything that I've created thus far, I've tried to put that I can statement on. The only problem is those two huge file cabinets over there that have everything prior to this whole revelation that don't have those. So I need to get better at somehow relaying that. And I don't know if that's with a blank sheet that just I can staple on when I have time. But it's all, then is that the best use of my time?
Right.
Or, that clerical stuff is that taking away from our learning. So it's balancing that, but somehow connecting it to our learning targets.
Right. And that could even be something as simple as printing off a label with the standard on it. Don't recreate the whole thing, just stick the label on it so when you make copies and stuff, it's there.
Yeah.
So definitely not taking the time to recreate everything because it's not feasible for anybody.
No.
But just doing those little things to make sure that connection is made from what you guys spend a lot of hard time on here to connect that at home so the parents can reinforce that. The next higher level degree of implementation is educator occasionally plans instructional activities to include eliciting evidence of student learning relative to specific learning goals and to provide specifically detailed information for action. So when I was looking at these, I really focused on the examples because there aren't examples over here, but the examples they give here are observations, questioning, probes, ungraded quizzes, scoring guides, or other checks for understanding.
And I would say the thing that I get a lot of information on that is not seen as an assessment per se is my morning work. Because in that it gets them into a routine, which I really like, but it makes them write a sentence. It makes them sound out words. It makes them show me evidence of can they sound out these words, do they know the letter hook to it. It has a math component for numbers with either building quantities or writing the actual number. So when I think of this, I'm thinking of how am I using that morning work? Because it has a lot of those pieces of evidence. But then how do I build a lesson around the things that I'm seeing on that with probing those questions or things like that?
And that would be evidence of like those ungraded quizzes or the, just the questions that you get and you gather from the students according just to what they do for that first 10-15 minutes.
But I do use that to help separate the writing part of it, a lot of my workstation groups and focuses, because it just tells me so much because they're having to do it all on their own, and it's so routine that I don't even think that they realize I'm using this for any information. So it's their true skill showing.
I know Kaiser came home end of last week and said, Mom, I really need to work on my numbers. I flip around a couple of them, and I notice it during morning work. I'm like,
mm-hmm. And a lot of times we'll just have, because then I go in phases of I'll check it and make them fix it right in front of me. Other times I'll just have a conversation with them and say, this one was another one that you flipped around, or, oh, I couldn't read this sentence. Do you want to change it, or are you going to do it at home? And giving them so it's not always a chore every day, because I don't want it to become that. So I'm trying to balance that a little bit too.
Well, and that's one of the next ones we'll talk about is that feedback. So are you giving them an assessment and they're not getting any feedback, it's just take that home, put it in your folder, or are they learning from that feedback? So that'll be interesting to look at that one as well. But then looking at this one, that occasionally to regularly. Because I think the big difference is these first three, it's only report card stuff you're focusing on. This is where I think we need to look at where you lay. So it's occasionally and regularly, I guess, is the big difference.
And I think for myself, I'm going to give myself a 2 just because I think that there's a lot of room for improvement there. And I think it's not necessarily doing something that's different. It's just using what I'm currently doing and using it more efficiently or going deeper with that stuff.
Being purposeful about what you're giving for assignments for kids and actually using it to make decisions. Okay. This next level of implementation, educator does not interpret evidence to inform next steps of instruction.
I don't. I should be fired.
Educator interprets evidence to inform next steps in instruction for the entire class. A level 2, or the next higher degree, educator occasionally interprets evidence to identify students or groups of students with specific learning gaps. And then that highest degree would be educator regularly interprets evidence to identify students or groups of students with specific learning gaps.
And I think I definitely do it regularly, just because with planning how many small groups that we do a day in early elementary, I think I have to do that, or why am I planning that many groups?
Right. Yeah.
So I think I actually am going to give myself a pretty high one on that one.
Well, that's good. And it shows that you are being deliberate about what you're doing with those different groups, and there is a focus on, I'm not just saying, hey, 5 of you come back here. There's a specific focus that you're doing with those groups, so that's good. This next one has just the 2 different levels of implementation. Educator occasionally provides differentiated instruction opportunities to close learning gaps or increase students' level of sophistication of learning goals, and the only difference to that highest level of implementation is regularly.
I would think I'm pretty regular with that.
Yeah, especially with how you talked about all the different levels that you're doing. They're not doing the same thing, or they have different expectations, or they're modified. So I would definitely say that level 1 there. And then this last one just talks about, the individual as opposed to group, the actual learning target of each assignment. So students are always engaged in whole group instructional activities.
I read that as, yes, they're always engaged. They listen to everything I say.
Yeah. So you could look at it both ways. They're engaged in whole group, or they're always engaged in whole group.
Yes.
Yeah. The next level is students are occasionally working on specific learning goals individually or in groups. And then that highest level of implementation, students are regularly working on specific learning goals individually or in groups.
I think we're at occasionally right now. I think I still sometimes in my workstations will just plug in an activity that I either like to do or I know is fun. I think they need those breaks and I need those built in, but just making sure I'm always purposeful. I don't know.
Well, and it sounds like, there's a kind of a tight line between the two. It's occasionally and regularly. But what it sounds like to me is sometimes you might have the same assignment, and you're always very purposeful about why you're assigning it, but does it always have to be the same? Can it be
And that's what I struggle with is when I plan it, I really do have them all doing the same the same activity. But it is, okay, for this group, I want you doing it this way. This group, I want you to take your learning here, you know? But again, if you ask kids, I don't know if they would always be able to tell you what that looked like. Let's go occasionally on that one.
All right, and that's okay too. So the last thing I'm going to ask you is, when you think about all of the different levels of implementation and how you're at a 2 and a 1 and a 1 and a 2, what would it look like to take your learning in your classroom and what you do to that next level?
I think what I need to get better at, or to go deeper with, is first of all giving them the action steps on how to do it and what it might look like modeling that. Getting them to understand their learning is going to take them to here. Or once we hit this progression, this is where we're going next. To always see what's coming down the pipe. I also think getting that translated somehow for parents to see that, and I've tried doing that a little bit with the blog post on here's what our day looks like, just to see, okay, the morning work, when it comes home every day, don't just throw it away, look through it, you know, this is what I look for when I'm doing it. I don't always check it. Yeah, but I check it pretty regularly. We don't always fix it. Sometimes we do, sometimes I want you to do that at home and have that opportunity at home to do it. So having that, but I don't blog as regularly as I should because there's always something else I'm doing, you know? So either getting more regular on putting it on the papers that come home, or getting more regular with the blog post, because I do think I've got a lot of hits, enough that it's making an impact on the kids and their conversations with parents, because I think they're reading them. So,
All right. So what we'll look at is that big picture.
on the locker. Thanks.
That big picture, rather than just here are your I can statements.
Yeah.
What's this leading to? Kind of be more deliberate about that, and then that parent connection.
Yeah.
Making sure that they know the purpose.
And getting it visual for kids, I guess, is another thing that I want to take this to. Is I know it's not visual right now for kids. I'm struggling with how that's going to be maintained regularly with everything else I want to do. I just need to start limiting what my focus is and getting really good at something before I move on.
And I think starting here with this is just good teaching practices. Let's hone in on one that you really are passionate about and look for ways to get better, and then we can move on to another one. Yeah. All right. So we'll look at the next 4 when we get together next time.
Sounds good.
And maybe set some goals.
Wonderful.